You're completely correct in saying HPV vaccine was and still is a medical breakthrough. It's the first ever anti-cancer vaccine that could prevent the development of a disease. And cervical cancer is not one that you're going to get in your 60s and 70s. I see that very rarely. Cervical cancer is a truly awful disease that women get in the prime of their life, in their late 30s to 40s, when they are the pillar of strength for their family, when they have young children, children going to school. It's a disease that if you get it at stage 3 or 4 at that time, it's so difficult to treat and keep a handle of and cure. So don't think that it's something that's going to affect women, later on in life. This is really a disease, if not picked up early, can affect women quite young. And I see this too often. I see women with this disease, they have children in primary school, they're going every day for radiotherapy, when it is beyond unfortunate, is actually tragic, because it could have been prevented.
Well, also, I think there's something of a modern phenomena around the world, maybe primarily with first world countries, but we have cultural influence. And women, working women, tend to want to put off having children. It's a bit of a catch-22 because, of course, as women get older, things become a bit more tricky. But then now, I'm curious, how many women don't quite understand this is not like other forms of cancer, as you said, that will hit you later in life. And if it hits you in your late 20s to early 30s, that's so rare, and you just had a bad, losing lottery ticket. It's not that. This is something that, this is the target of this disease, essentially. And then, on top of that, the treatments now, depending on how aggressive it is, could it impact both? Well, obviously it would impact a pregnancy if you're talking about chemotherapy and radiology while pregnant, but a woman's ability to become pregnant in the future after this, are there risks for that? Because I feel as though there are women, young women, professionals, they kind of take it for granted, and then when you add this into the mix now, it could be a very unfortunate surprise.
Yes. True. I mean, women everywhere around the world are waiting longer and longer to get pregnant. I mean, life happens, very career-oriented. But yes, if cervical cancer is picked up, it does impact fertility to the point where if it's picked up at a later stage, and I mean, even the later stage 1, stage 2, you will have a complete loss of fertility for this cancer to be adequately treated. And that's something that is, nobody wants that. Women do want to have children. They want to have children at a point in their life where they feel comfortable and able to manage. And having this disease get in the way is one that could be avoided. But even there are fertility-sparing treatments if the disease is picked up very early. But ideally, we want to pick it up even before it's cancer, which is what a pap smear is designed to do, to pick up pre-cancer. And I can't do that, like I said, with lots of cancers. This is one of the few, if not only, where we have an almost perfect screening test called a pap smear, developed many years ago and has changed the face of this disease in many countries. And as you said, in first world countries, they very rarely see cervical cancer anymore. It's, I think, close to 15th on their list of cancers. Number 1 here in Trinidad for me in gynecology. It doesn't have to be.
And would it be fair to assume that it's pretty high up just in general for cancers in TNT? It would be one of the more common ones in the country just across the board?
It is. Obviously in female cancers, breast tends to be the commonest. And that's another where we do recommend screening. But it is, for me, the commonest gynecological cancers. And gynecological cancers could be cancer of the uterus or the womb, cancer of the ovary, cancer of, other parts of the female genital tract, such as the fallopian tube. But the one that trumps all of that is actually cervical cancer. And it's the one that is potentially preventable with regular screening and for the younger age group for HPV vaccination.
I mean, it sounds to me as though it's almost like if, nature still gives us a balance. Yes, younger people have risk of this, but it's easier to screen. Now, you said even late stage 1 could have serious impacts on fertility. Is it like completely, there is no chance once you have to treat at that stage, or zero chance?
Yes, because for the later, even stage 1, where you think it's going to be early, stage 1 is divided into other subcategories depending on how large the tumor could be. And hopefully we want it to be only millimeters, but if it goes into centimeters, that affects the potential for spread, for involvement of other organs, for involvement of what we call lymph nodes. And in the majority of those later cases, even stage 1, we have to offer something called a hysterectomy, which is removing the entire organ, removing the entire uterus, of which the cervix is a tiny part of it. And if you have a hysterectomy, unfortunately, that means complete loss of fertility.
Right.
And even though you hear in the news now about uterine transplants, that's still very much not in the mainstream. It's still in the research phases and will not be done as a routine procedure anytime soon. So having a hysterectomy still means loss of fertility, loss of being able to carry your own child. And that's something we want to prevent.
Just now, I assume for those women who don't want children, it's not as big of a deal. But would there be other medical complications then with having your uterus having to be removed with a hysterectomy? Potential long-term complications, or once you have it done, for the most part, you're in the clear, you just have the other unfortunate consequences that you may or may not have to deal with?
Yes, I mean, removing the uterus, really the impact is no more fertility, no more children, or if you never had any, you can't have at all. Going into early menopause, things like that is actually dictated by your ovaries. And the ovaries need not necessarily be removed when the uterus is removed, even for cervical cancer. That's something that is done in the older age group if they are close to menopause. But yes, there are downsides for having major surgery. You involve the risk of surgery. You can have other long-term complications, bladder problems, wound infections. You can have problems with prolapse, things like that. You don't really want to have a hysterectomy unless you need to. It's always better to prevent. Even if you have an abnormal pap smear, we tend to do a smaller local procedure that you don't even need to be asleep for, called a loop excision or a LETS. That's for precancerous disease, and that's something that is a walk-in day case. It could be done in a clinic setting that you're awake for. That's much easier and much nicer than coming in to have major surgery, which will put you out of commission for several weeks. So even though for those ladies who say fertility is not an issue, I wouldn't mind having major surgery, that's all well and fine. But once you do that for a cervical cancer, you have to also be aware that when we treat cancer, it's sometimes not as easy as just cutting it out and forgetting about it, and it will never cause a problem again. Because if it was as easy, we could just cure everybody with every cancer. But you could still have cervical cancer, have a hysterectomy, and that same disease can come back. You can have what's called a recurrence. It can recur somewhere else in the body. So you do want to be on the side of prevention here. And if not prevention, you want to be on the side of very early detection.
And that leads me to my next question, because, okay, obviously HPV, that's one major risk factor. What other factors could potentially contribute to cervical cancer? Because I'm sure there are some women, they might be very much, careful about that one big thing, but something else might come that they might not have realized, or it hasn't occurred to them.
Yes, I mean, the risk factors include the risk factors for getting HPV. And the textbooks and studies would always say, look out for the women with, multiple partners, early age they started sexual activity. But that really, I don't want to have that connotation that this disease is really one that is just for high-risk women, whereas you can have one partner and still get cervical cancer if you haven't had regular screening. So the risk factors really include, what I always say is the biggest risk factor is not having a pap smear. That is the biggest risk factor. Others include cigarette smoking. if you have compromise to your immune system, for example, HIV, those ladies are definitely more prone to getting cervical cancer, so they need to be screened, which is pap smears regularly. If you've had kidney transplants or other transplants, that means your immune system is being suppressed by regular medication. Those women do need to be tested more frequently. But if there's anyone in Trinidad that is still smoking, I would certainly advise stopping. That is a major risk factor for cervical cancer, as well as other cancers.
Right, it seems like smoking is a major risk factor for a lot of things, not just
Well,
lung cancer.
yeah, and that's not even a weak link. That's well documented in good, robust studies.
And I guess one of the things that I want to ask, because I don't know to what extent you will know, but maybe you have some experience. Say, an unfortunate young lady has to go through this, but they do want to be a mother. I think one of the things is we kind of take it for granted. We see what goes on in the States and we think, well, we have access to all of that here. To some extent, yes, you could, if we don't have the medical procedure available here, you could fly to the States. But things like surrogacy or adoption, well, with regards to surrogacy as a medical, to some extent, you're asking another woman biologically to go through pregnancy for you. Is that doable in TNT? I myself am not aware.
Yeah, well, there are fertility centers that offer the advice and treatment and IVF for couples who are trying to conceive even without any malignancy or cancer. There is also the option of somebody who still has the ovaries, because we wouldn't need to remove that to treat cervical cancer.
Right.
But sometimes we can affect the ovarian function if we have to use radiation or chemotherapy treatment. But there is still the option of egg preservation, where they harvest the eggs before treatment starts, and therefore that is used later on in a surrogate. But it is biologically, your child. Centers are available here that do give advice and can offer harvesting. That's something that does need to be counseled well before, and that's something that needs to be done very quickly, because it needs to be done before treatment starts. And obviously, as an oncologist, you want to ensure that nothing contributes to any significant delay to starting treatment. Because once you have a diagnosis of a malignancy or a cancer, you want to start treatment as soon as it is possible. But yes, there are some fertility options for this group of patients. If you are diagnosed early enough, there is fertility sparing surgery as well. But surrogacy and other methods that we hear about all the time in America and in Europe, these can be offered if you are willing to, see a specialist who has, and they most will have contacts abroad and refer you. Obviously, there is a major cost factor involved.
Right.
This is something that has significant financial commitment, and that is what I think affects a lot of people, access to IVF, access to fertility treatment, but it is certainly worthwhile being explored. And I tend to refer lots of ladies for advice for fertility treatment, for these procedures, directly to a team here in Trinidad, who then will be able to advise accordingly.
And I just want to close, we've been speaking a lot about treatments and some of the things that could happen if caught, but then there's always the risk that you don't catch it until it's too late. Generally speaking, the mortality rate of this cancer, this is not something I assume you could play around with and take for granted. Well, we'll catch it at some point.
No.
There's a good chance that by the time you catch it, it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, if you have advanced disease which has spread to other organs in the tummy, like the majority of cancers, that's so difficult to offer a cure. We can try to offer some form of treatment to stabilize it so it may not get worse over the next months or years. That doesn't always work. If you have stage 3 or particularly stage 4 disease, which has spread to other organs such as the bladder, the rectum, the liver, other parts with significant lymph nodal disease, sometimes all we can offer is what's called palliative treatment. And that's where it's not really actively treated the cancer, because we know active treatment of the cancer is going to be futile, where we just deal with symptom control. And that is beyond dismal. So, I mean, the message here is you don't want it to get to that stage at all. That is a really tragic, tragic outcome of leaving things too long, not finding it until it's too late, waiting a bit long. We want to catch this cancer even before it starts.
Well, folks, you heard it from Dr. Vanessa Harry herself, something that's very preventable, and that's the key point. The consequences could be dire, but the prevention is relatively straightforward, I guess you could say. So thank you, Dr. Harry, for coming on to AM Prime and sharing with us all you know.
Thanks again. Okay. Have a good day.
You too, and stay safe. Stay safe for the season. Folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue conversations. We're going to switch gears now to a different side of society. Stay tuned to AM Prime. We'll be right back.
Like many others trying to save on Carnival, Gabby thought she should go for 50% off makeup.
What about the other side? Well, Daisy 50% off offer. So you know.
No makeup artist we don't know. What we do know is the savviest savings for Carnival are at KFC. Get a Jab Jab box, 1-piece chicken, 1 regular fries, and a biscuit for only $25.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you do now, Andrew.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the right and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother, We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to AM Prime, and switching gears now to a bit more of a discussion on the economy. We have with us the President of the Supermarkets Association, Mr. Rajiv Dipti. Mr. Dipti, good morning, sir. Thank you for joining me here on AM Prime.
Good morning to you, good morning to your viewers, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, one of the things that has been a bit of an alarming, of course, there was a report that said that, you know, the average Trinbagonian, well, the average Trinidadian, I should say, things are a little bit different in Tobago, spends about 33 days out of the year stuck in traffic. Something along those lines. When you put it that way, it's a bit distressing almost. If you're one of the people that's more or less going through an hour to 2 hours of traffic every day. So now, with regards to your section of the business community, supermarkets, we might kind of take it for granted, but to some extent, you have to deal with the fact that delivery trucks are stuck in that traffic depending, as well as your customers. So you might actually be feeling it on both ends, the impact that this traffic might have on the businesses of your members.
Yes, so it's really important to note as we couch the discussion of traffic congestion that it affects everyone in Trinidad and Tobago. And to analogize everything you just said, according to the ECLAC report that was recently published, there are more cars in Trinidad and Tobago, more vehicles than there are people in perhaps Barbados. So it's really staggering to analyze just how bad the congestion contributes to what we see happening on a daily basis, particularly when you consider factors such as productivity, factors such as the ease of the deliveries, and so on. It's something that when we consider, particularly for our customers and the frustrations that they have to bear, when you're moving from south to north along the northbound highway, and particularly where you have these issues, you're going to, first of all, supermarkets are delivery points and checkpoints for warehouses where goods are stored. These goods are being moved from supplier warehouses, mainly in the east-west corridor. And it's something that we all have to bear the traffic. And, you know, in some ways that has contributed to the saturation of the supermarket sector. Supermarkets aren't just the primary retail hub for customers. You have a lot of corner shops, mini marts, convenience stores thriving as a result of the traffic because of the convenience options that are on offer for customers who wish to avoid the traffic. So it's something that, you know, it heavily contributes to the situation. I remember that last year we sat in a meeting with the Ministry of Works and Transport with an independent European consultant, and it was something that when we looked at the analysis, particularly of deliveries at nighttime, there were security concerns, logistics that had to be considered, as well as the crime that came into focus when having those discussions, because obviously it's a different layer and a different element. So the congestion definitely affects everyone, and it's something where our sector is concerned. It does not contribute, and it's something that we feel very strongly about in terms of how do we alleviate this. I mean, we've put forward that maybe certain heavy equipment trucks, long bed trucks could maybe move at a certain hour. Those add to the traffic as well, because that's the construction sector you're talking about, and there's no easy fix for this.
Well, also, one of the things, now it's one thing if you're in a remote area and deliveries, are very limited. But I find that in whichever grocery store in Port of Spain I go to, and of course Port of Spain is one of the main areas, the culprits for the traffic, there are times when it seems as though a grocery will run out of X, a grocery will run out of Y. And you're thinking to yourself, it's not as though we're the size of Texas and they have to take 2 days bringing stuff. But with my family business, it's not in supermarkets, but we buy from wholesalers. The schedule of deliveries seems to be very much restricted by the traffic. And, when they could come for you, well, maybe not today, but tomorrow we could deliver the goods. And if you don't order, you might have to wait for several days to get something that you need. And it actually might, I think, is it fair to say, starting to impact supermarkets now, because it's just more restricted. We kind of take it for granted that, it's down the road. The East-West corridor is not that far from, a half of the country. But it's not as though if you need something, the truck could just go down the road for 5 minutes and bring it to you, because it's going to be an hour of traffic.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, with what you just said there. And I think it also provides an analysis of how the traffic has shaped the industry in terms of supply. A major supplier, typically based in the East-West corridor, may want to ensure that there is enough cover for stores in remote areas or in dense areas, urban dense areas, particularly where you just pointed out there in Port of Spain. So it creates another layer of distribution in terms of wholesalers, and it also creates another layer in terms of cost, because where you have third-party middlemen doing distribution, it's going to contribute an additional layer of cost to a store, as opposed to getting it directly from the supplier. So that's something that we've seen, particularly in the south-central corridors, where where supply is typically not assured. So the congestion has contributed to creating a denizen almost of supply routes and supply warehousing.
Well, it seems as though, and this might be true for many businesses, but with supermarkets, there's a push-pull from different factors. You mentioned one, crime. One of the things I think that you could see in the States, to beat daytime traffic, they'll have night shifts, but that seems to be something maybe we could have considered 10 years ago. Now, I'm not too sure, especially with not just the fact that the business has to be worried about its own security, but the workers potentially have to be worried about their own security if they're traveling at night, and they may or may not be able to get transport to begin with. But then there's also the fact that the economy, with the price of food right now, I think to some extent, ideally the market forces will want larger supermarkets with more options, more bulk buying, and more capacity for more customers. So instead of having to have 3 supermarkets and spread out, you just have one big one for whichever particular company. And that may, economically speaking, be the right answer, but traffic-wise, that's going to be a disaster because you pointed out there's more opportunity for smaller scale operations. It's not necessarily going to give you the economies of scale, but it's going to beat the traffic if you are more spread out. So is the industry kind of feeling this kind of, there are different things, different avenues that different factors want us to go down, but we're trying to have to compromise to work out between all 3 sets of demands?
You're absolutely correct in that it's a very formulaic set of demands. And what's very important to keep in mind and couch here is that the industry itself is very competitive. The industry competes on price, product, and brand loyalty. And it's very important to consider that even though consumers opt for the best price options, typically, as we saw at Christmas time in particular, if a popular location is too busy, there are customers that opt for the convenience store options and will pay a little bit more for the convenience store options to stay away from crowded parking lots and crowded grocery stores. These are things that the industry calibrates itself to cater for, and it's very important that the industry caters for all customer shopping needs. So while you see that there may be particular economics and for the enjoyment of customers, we also see that the market has calibrated itself to ensure that those options have been provided for the convenience of customers. There are customers who, as we discussed, have options for the corner shops, the mini marts, the stores, and those are still very popular in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, is there any concern that at some point the market just won't be able to compensate for everything that's going to be demanded for it? Because one of the things with the traffic congestion is, I think if you ask somebody about this, 20 years ago, they might not have necessarily thought it will reach quite this stage. Maybe I'm underestimating it, but I feel as though it's not necessarily, exponentially worse, but it got worse enough that I feel a bit more of the impact. Are there any concerns that at some point, this just might become untenable because we're going to run out of space to build more road, and that usually is not really a long-term solution anyway?
No, I fully agree with you in that you can't build your way out of traffic congestion. You can't. It just creates more congestion. At some point, there's been a lot of discussions about different transport paradigms and how those contribute to the actual productivity, because according to the report that was published, the average commuter spends nearly up to 3 hours in traffic daily, which is not an ideal situation. And it's something that where we've been, kind of looking at the that same implosion you're kind of referring to with respect to how, at what point do customers, can we bill our way out of it? Can we? There's been a lot of attrition, particularly during COVID, that where you've seen portfolio of products disappear, and you've kind of seen that convenience options have become popular once again. It's really become particular, and this is another layer. COVID provided another layer. People opted for convenience because they just wanted to stay away from crowded spots. And what we've noticed is that those options have really kind of become popular in and around itself. If you look at Superfarm, for example, it's a convenience store. If you look at some of the convenience store at the quick shop outlets, those have become popular and convenient. And there are different price layers, price points to all of these things. And it's something that when you consider that customers are going to, out of sheer frustration, just subscribe to these brands, it makes it enduring. And when you look at the traffic situation, I don't see an easy, quick, short-hanging, low-hanging fix for that. So I can't see things changing too much from where it is. In fact, I think that more of these options will become more available to the commuting customers in the future.
Well, one of the things that we haven't seen start up here, I think COVID pushed this even more, accelerated this, at least in the States and maybe other parts of the world, home deliveries. You know, you go on an app, you order your groceries and it's delivered. Now, I know you could order online for pickup, at least in one big warehouse store. But with the traffic, I assume that's not really much of a better option, you know, because, and I don't even know if it's economically viable. Would you agree with that?
So you have customers who are they're very price sensitive and they're cognizant of prices. And what tends to happen is that when you do opt for these avenues of digital, and it's been tried heavily during COVID and in the post-pandemic paradigm, it adds another layer of cost. And the cost is not insignificant. It's probably 5 to 10% of your overall order. That's not something customers are willing to pay on a regular basis. It's something that they may opt for on a convenience basis. But what we found, particularly when it comes to grocery items, people are very, picky about what they're getting in their carts, particularly if it comes to a block of cheese, if it comes to a pack of meat, if it comes to something that's produce, if it's and these are things that they like to see, that they like to feel. These are things that they like to purchase themselves, that they do not leave to a store employee to ensure that the order is satisfactory for them. What we've seen become very popular in terms of delivery is the restaurant experience, because it's an immediately indulgent and satisfying one for the customers to enjoy. But particularly with grocery stores, and you have to remember there's a proliferation of enjoyment of options. There's lots of stores on every street in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not to say that it's inconvenient for to get out. So to pay that cost to have it delivered to you is not something that's really lasted in the post-COVID period.
Well, and all of these things, I think, are speaking to costs kind of being driven up. It might be not so perceptible to most people. I'm sure your various members, deeper analysis might get into it, but it'll take a lot of, digging into the numbers and formulas to try and work it out. But on top of that, I do just want to ask, because we just had a period where cost of food got alarming. At one point, I just refused to buy sweet peppers, and I still personally don't buy tomatoes because it is what it is, right? But has our food prices stabilized? Are there any concerns on the horizon?
There are always long-term concerns, particularly where there's conflict, geographically speaking, particularly where there's uncertainty on international markets, and so on and so forth. A new year brings new challenges, and it's always going to be a mix of what endures from last year coming into this year. We do acknowledge there's been global inflation in all sectors, which obviously will impact things going forward. As you did correctly state that prices have stabilized on global markets, but they've stabilized at higher prices than they were pre-COVID. And it's going to take some time to adjust to that. It's going to take some time to adjust to ensuring that international markets remain in a period of stability. Stability internationally, and stability is what really ensures the constancy and consistency of pricing paradigms, and that's so important. So where we head into 2024 now, in this period, we really are hoping that that is what we continue to see as the outlook moving forward.
So far as you could see, is there any hope that our potential in agriculture might be able to impact this? Because I know that on one hand, it won't have to be imported, but on the other hand, we might not have the economies of scale with local production, at least how the models that we have right now. Is there any hope that there is potential there? Or because I know imported food has still been cheaper, even with everything going up, you know. Is it that that's just the reality? Imported food is cheaper, and right now that is the best bet for the consumer?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think that there's so much potential for basic food production in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that there definitely is the land use to make a best use of first world practices and intensive, capital intensive and technologically intensive practices to ensure that we get the best yields for the investments that are made into these basic food production initiatives. And I think there's a lot of space for big businesses and medium-sized businesses to get involved to ensure that this is something that could take place. I think, too, that if the government can provide a fiscal structure to ensure that it's incentivized, not just for basic production, but for value-added production, the supply chain, that you can get certain outcomes, because that's where you are really able to achieve import substitution through the implementation of these practices. But it needs to be part of a cogent food security policy, and food security is something that's come into focus at the level of CARICOM. CARICOM has pledged the 25% reduction in the food import bill by 2025. We're in 2024. I don't know how much of that we've actually achieved. At the level of the association, we tend to try to see how imports substitution, but let me make it clear, 95% of what you see on grocery shelves are imported. So the need to import by the importers, because the supermarkets don't do the importing. The importers are suppliers and distributors. If they are local manufacturers, they're importing the inputs to production. We're a very import-dependent nation, and those imports are based on the consistent need for foreign exchange to ensure that the supply chain is consistent. So as much as we would like to ensure that, we want to see import substitution happening, we need to take a look around all sectors. If you take a look at poultry sectors, the inputs where you have the feeds, the fertilizers, the pesticides, all those things are imported. So we need to see more movement in the value-added chain of several sectors to really make a dent there and to ensure that consistent import substitution is taking place, because otherwise we're just going in circles.
But I think the key takeaway is we do have the potential. It's just a long road to kind of get that potential and turn it into something actual.
Yeah, certainly, as long as the political will is there from the government, which I think it is, and I think that you need to have big business involved, because I'm going to say it, that these are capital intensive projects. They will need an injection, they will need leadership, they will need stimulation, but they'll also need guidance by government. And this is where private-public initiatives and partnerships are really important to ensure the best outcomes. We've seen some initiatives, I think Berry Cove in Tobago, you have groups like Hadco and Blue Waters involved in basic food production. And it's something that I think needs to be encouraged in a big way, in a strong way. And I think there's a lot of land in Trinidad and Tobago and particularly in a climate such as this, that can be pivoted to food production in a meaningful way, and incentivize a lot of the local chain groups in terms of the fast food outlets to see how they can get involved in different things. There's a lot of ways to get creative with this.
Indeed, that's all I can say. That indeed, I more or less agree with everything you just said 100%, and I too hope that we could get it done, because on a general economic sense, there will be a lot of benefits, I think, as well to the economy. So, Mr. Dipty, thank you for joining me for this great conversation, a lot of insight on various levels, and hopefully we could see the improvements and not have, customers and delivery drivers pulling their hair out for 3 hours. Stay safe, Mr. Dipty.
Thank you, and good day, Trinidad and Tobago. Take care.
Thank you. That was Rajiv Dipty, President of the Supermarket Association. We're going to take a break here, folks. When we come back, we're going to again switch gears. moving back to the sister isle, hopefully we'll have a discussion, something of a continuance with a different perspective from the topic yesterday. But this is AM Prime at WESN, the content capital, broadcasting in HD. We'll be right back.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sarah Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Former Energy Minister cautions on political risk of doing business with Venezuela. High levels of Saharan dust may exacerbate illness in persons. 3 robbery suspects held in Barataria. And regionally, first laparoscopic donor nephrectomy successfully performed in Guyana. Now for the details. Kevin Ramnarine, former Energy Minister, has emphasized the inherent political risk associated with conducting business with Venezuela, a sentiment amplified by the looming general election in the country. Ramnarine's remarks come in the wake of the United States' decision to reinstate sanctions on Venezuela, following the Venezuelan Supreme Court's affirmation of a 15-year ban on key opposition figure, Maria Corina Machado, from participating in the upcoming presidential election. In October 2023, the U.S. had relaxed its sanctions on Venezuela as part of the Barbados Agreement, in which President Nicolas Maduro committed to holding transparent and fair presidential elections, among other concessions. It's important to note that this agreement stands distinct from the Dragon gas deal between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. The dust carried by winds from the Sahara Desert in North Africa has engulfed countries from Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago in the south to Barbados and St. Lucia in the east. Moderate, at times high concentrations of Saharan dust in the atmosphere. Highest concentrations expected from the 31st January to 3rd February 2024. High levels of Saharan dust may cause a dry cough, sore throat, itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, and a runny nose. While persons may experience symptoms during the days of a Saharan dust event, these symptoms should disappear as the dust levels reduce. Consider staying indoors when possible to reduce the symptoms that may occur during the Saharan dust surges. Police arrested 3 suspects on Tuesday during an anti-crime exercise in Barataria. The men are expected to answer to charges of attempted store breaking with intent and possession of house-breaking implements by night. According to police, around 9:30 p.m. on Monday, 29 January, the supervisors at an establishment located at number 31A 10th Avenue, Barataria, in the vicinity of Maritime Roundabout, secured the service station by locking all windows and doors and went away. At 2:45 a.m. the following day, the informant awoke from sleep and checked the CCTV cameras located at the said service station when she observed 3 men unknown to her attempting to gain entry to the service station through a door to the rear of the building. The suspects were in possession of a number of house-breaking implements. All 3 suspects were cautioned by PC Villa Laurel and subsequently conveyed to the Barataria police station pending further inquiries. Regionally, in a milestone achievement for medical advancement in Guyana, surgeons at the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation have accomplished their inaugural laparoscopic donor nephrectomy on January 29th. The groundbreaking surgery was performed on a compassionate woman who generously donated her kidney to a 17-year-old male relative. The recipient had been battling with chronic kidney failure induced by type 1 diabetes, underscoring the critical need for the transplant. GPHC lauded the procedure as a remarkable success, emphasizing the exceptional functionality of the transplanted kidney. marked by the cessation of dialysis. The patient's remarkable recovery, marked by the cessation of dialysis, underscores the procedure's efficiency, underscores the procedure's efficacy in restoring renal health. This achievement signals a significant leap forward in Guyana's medical capabilities, promising hope for individuals grappling with renal ailments in the region. Well, that's it. News on the hour on WESN. I am Sira Ali. Thank you for watching.
Yo, it's Rome! And this year we want to have a safe carnival just like every other carnival. So this year we're talking a smart carnival. We're talking safety measures against real threats. We're going to fet smart, we're going to play smart and move smart because it's all about rum, gal and money. Not that no call way, no time for folly. We jamming all day. Jamming on the roadway. If you see me in a Benz or a Beamer, hustle hard for me.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. And you may have watched yesterday's episode where we had one political leader of the PDP, Watson Duke, speaking about comments he made the week before that autonomy is not enough. And I myself found that that conversation was not quite enough. So, to give us a different perspective, still from Tobago, we do have the political leader of the PNM Tobago Council to speak with us today, Mr. Ansel Dennis. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being on AM Prime.
Good morning. I trust that all is well with you. It's a pleasure to be here once again to discuss Tobago's and Trinidad and Tobago's business.
Well, yes, because to some extent, that's kind of what this is about. It's the nature of the relationship, and I think I understand when Tobagonians do feel a bit somewhat left out sometimes of the discussion. I think it's every now and then people in the media, politicians have a bit of a slip and they refer to the country as Trinidad. I try to say if it's Trinidad and Tobago and the people as Trinbagonians to try to remind ourselves, well, there's a whole other island, and the key point is that whole other island does have a different reality than just, say, one corner of Trinidad. The differences make practical challenges that Mayaro has its own challenges, but not quite like Tobago. I can't drive to Tobago.
Definitely.
So,
yes.
Mr. Duke was saying autonomy is not enough. Tobago wants self-determination. And he was trying to say that, look, we never had a chance to determine our future. We need more rights. We need our rights recognized. I was trying to get what is the difference between potentially what autonomy is and what self-determination is. Because in my mind, one of the things on the table with autonomy is the capacity for Tobago to have its own laws. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, definitely. Now, I think what you have in Tobago are a number of confused and, in some cases, ignorant leaders. And when I say ignorant, they simply do not know what they are talking about. Basically going around saying different things that mean the same thing, right? So self-determination, self-government, autonomy, all of them come from the overall theme of decentralization, right? And Tobago at this point in time is about further autonomy. The island has some limited autonomy where we can do certain things ourselves, but it is certainly not enough at this point. Hence, we have been engaged in a long-standing process to ensure that we get further autonomy, more powers, because what we have now is mostly administrative decentralization, where you have the central government of Trinidad and Tobago at the center, and they have opted, of course, due to Tobago's request as well to decentralize mostly administrative responsibilities to a Tobago House of Assembly, which is a local governing body on the island of Tobago, right? But of course, you can have decentralization without devolution. Devolution now is where you're not only moving the responsibilities, but you're also moving the power to exercise those responsibilities. And one of the issues that we have in Tobago is notwithstanding the fact that we have the administrative responsibilities for several areas, tourism, agriculture, etc., we do not necessarily have the devolved powers to make laws and to self-determine, as Mr. Duke was saying, concerning these very issues. So, of course, further autonomy through devolution of those lawmaking powers and other issues will, of course, give us that ability to self-determine and to self-government. And we have already been involved in some level of self-government. There are certain things that we do for ourselves and that we decide for ourselves in Tobago, even in the absence of lawmaking powers. So self-determination, self-government, autonomy, all of them basically mean the same thing. There is really no difference. What Mr. Duke must be honest with the people of Tobago about is the fact that he really in his heart prefers independence, because back in 2019, that was the basis of his party launch, to secede from Trinidad, to get independence. He even said at one point in time that he doesn't want any chief secretary stupidness. You could go back in the archives and you will hear those comments from Mr. Duke, because he believes that Tobago must have its own prime minister. But again, we started this process a long time ago. From the time Act 40 of 1996 was passed, it was decided back then that it was not going to be sufficient for us to achieve the kind of development and the kind of self-determination that we want. And therefore, there was a need for further autonomy, and of course, with devolved power, so that we could make laws for ourselves on the island. I must tell you as well, currently, that the Tobago House of Assembly is not a legislative body, right? There is no legislature in Tobago. Of course, you have a Tobago House of Assembly, you have 15 assemblymen and 4 councillors. And while they can debate and pass a bill within the THE, that bill has to be sent to Cabinet. And then, of course, Cabinet will make a determination whether it will be sent to Parliament or not. And then when it goes to Parliament, it is the Parliament, which is the only lawmaking body in the country, that will pass that bill into law, and it will be known as an assembly law. The new proposed bill that is before the Parliament provides Tobago with a legislature where you will have the same 15 assemblymen. I think the number of councillors was increased to 9, I think, if memory serves me correct. And then you will have the president coming on board to form a Tobago legislature. So what that means, or what that will result in, is that the Tobago House of Assembly can, in fact, when that is established, make laws without the involvement of Parliament at the national level. And that is what we are seeking in Tobago. It's not about independence. It's not about federalism, as some people are suggesting. It's simply the ability to do more for ourselves so that we can govern this island, Tobago, based on our own desires and aspirations as Tobagonians on the island. And I must say that the 2 bills that are currently before the Parliament provides exactly that. And permit me to remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago how we got here. Again, when Act 40 of 1996 was passed back then, most people believed that it was not enough. It fell short of what we really needed to further the interests of the people of Tobago. And from the time we got to 2003, 2004, thereabout, the then Tobago House of Assembly, led by Orville London at the time, put together a committee. It was known as the John Prince Committee, that went throughout Tobago doing consultations, garnering views, garnering ideas on this issue called autonomy. And that process went on for some time. Then, of course, we got to a period in 2012 leading up to the 2013 election, where there was some interference from the then People's Partnership government, and they attempted to bring their own bill to the parliament that did not represent the views of the people of Tobago, that usurped the process that the Tobago people was already progressing on, and therefore that process failed. Following that, the latest trust started when we had the Tobago House of Assembly election of 2013, which the PNM won 12-0, and then Ho Choy Charles, the late Chief Secretary, the late former Chief Secretary Ho Choy Charles, reached out to the then Chief Secretary of London, and they had a discussion on the issue. And the gentleman agreed that, look, if we are to achieve what we are trying to achieve, then it's important for all the political leaders in Tobago to remove their political hats, set aside party colors and party symbols, and come together and speak with one voice concerning this issue. And that was in 2013. A year later, in 2014, the Tobago Forum of Political Parties was birthed to achieve exactly that, where all the political leaders, all the key political players on the island came together to sit under that one forum called the Forum of Political Parties, and their first meeting was in January of 2014. Ashworth Jack, the leader of the TOP at that time, he dropped out of the process soon afterwards, but the work continued, spearheaded by Mr. London and Mr. Charles and other technocrats and legal luminaries from the island of Tobago. And they continued with consultations and meetings, and that culminated with a bill that was passed in the Tobago House of Assembly in November of 2016. That was actually Chief Secretary Orville London's last major act in his time as Chief Secretary of the island of Tobago, which spanned 16 years. So that bill was passed, it was sent to Cabinet. Cabinet made a very interesting decision, and the Cabinet at the time was led by Dr. Keith Rowley, who is still the Prime Minister to this day. And they made a decision to send the bills just as they were to a joint select committee of the Parliament. Because as you know, the Cabinet cannot pass the bill into law. It is the Parliament that must do so. And I say to you as well that within the Parliament, because of the setup of the Parliament, the People's National Movement alone cannot pass these bills. It requires support from the United National Congress. It requires support from the independents in the Senate, I believe, as well, right? So, of course, the bill went to the Joint Select Committee, and that bill represented 150%. In other words, we submitted the bill because we believed that the people of Tobago must put our best foot forward. We must put our best demands on the table. Mm-hmm. Of course, with the understanding that it's a negotiation, there must be some consensus that will be reached in the Parliament especially. And therefore, we knew for a fact that we wasn't going to get everything that we want. In any negotiation, you don't always get 100% of what you want. But we believe that if we place the best demands on the table, and we get maybe 90–95% of what we want, then we will still be in a good place. Well, so of course the bill went through the Joint Select Committee. I should allow you to come in now because I've been speaking for some time.
I mean, knowing the process is good, and understanding the fact that, look, you know, this is a tricky situation. You know, central government, Parliament, kind of has the final say on this. It's weird. There's no, it's of questionable ethics. Unfortunately, there's no better way to do it, right? Unfortunately.
There's no other way, actually.
Well, that too. So one of the things I want to ask first of all, just for some clarification, with legislative powers in Tobago, will there be some aspects where Parliament, Central Parliament, will still have laws that covers the whole country? Or will Tobago, right, so Tobago will only have certain specific powers, which might be wide-ranging, but there will be some limits?
Yes, because we have to understand that we operate within the context of a unitary state. It is still the country, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, but within that country, we are trying to give the island of Tobago further autonomy. We are trying to devolve powers to the island of Tobago, which is a unique kind of arrangement, right? And it is not the same, let me say this as well, it is not the same as local government in Trinidad. It is a far more complex arrangement. All right, so in those circumstances, it is understood that there are some responsibilities that will continue to be national responsibilities. And therefore, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago will retain lawmaking powers for those responsibilities, such as national security, immigration, and the Constitution and those kind of stuff. But those local responsibilities which we feel that can be devolved to the island of Tobago, things such as tourism or agriculture, culture, sports, community development, infrastructure, transportation, those issues will be devolved to the Tobago Island government once the bill is implemented, right? But of course, again, it's really a matter of achieving consensus, because that is how bills are passed into law. You don't very often, if it ever happens, have a situation where a bill goes into the parliament and is passed into law in the same state that it went into the parliament. Well, there is often negotiation, amendments, etc.
Well, that leads me to my next question, because, and you said it, and I think to some extent it'll be hard for me not to at least say that your claim is reasonable, just based off of the conversation I had with Mr. Duke. He was implying, you know, that Tobago should at least consider independence, have the forum to determine if they want it or not. That's how it was framed, which to some extent, all right, I could appreciate the sentiment, but I do have to ask, because even with then members of the PDP, independence did not seem to be on the table with the other then members of the PDP. And I don't know to what extent has that topic been brought up, because yes, there was a lot of consultations on autonomy, but I think as the issue hasn't been resolved yet, the conversation is still live within the various communities. Is that something that some Tobagonians are considering?
Very few Tobagonians are advocating for independence or even secession, right? And Mr. Duke is really the only person that I've known to push for that publicly, right? And by the way, that did not find favor with some of his leaders in his party, right? The current Chief Secretary, Charlie Augustine, distanced himself from that recommendation. So the current Chief Secretary and all is not in favor of independence as far as I'm aware. And it was really the PDP's position, because as leader of the PDP,
right,
he sets the policy for the party. He sets the tone, right? He speaks for the party. Whatever he says is really the policy of the party. And they were always in conflict, and maybe that explains why 1 year into their term, they fell apart and totally disintegrated, right? So there are very few people on the island who would call for independence or secession. There are some who are calling for federalism as well. I mean, this is where the whole idea of equality of status comes in, because to have a situation where Tobago is equal to Trinidad, then, and when I say equal in terms of its sovereignty, then there might be a need for federalism for that to happen, right? But I don't believe that is something the majority of Tobagonians are supporting. With federalism, you're going to have, of course, a federal government at the center or at the top, and then you have the government of Tobago and the government of Trinidad side by side with equal powers, right? And perhaps even equal resources. That is to be determined. But even that is not really a conversation that is happening on the island at this point in time. Again, the unfortunate reality is that you have different leaders on the island, people who believe they have an authority to speak on this issue, saying different things. There was even the economist, a well-respected economist, Vanus James, who I respect in terms of his economics, but I'm not so sure I am in support of his politics, right? Well, he's even suggesting an arrangement where the Tobago House of Assembly should have 55 members, right? Which, by the way, is more than we have in the lower house of the parliament.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the kinds of things that are happening on the island. Everybody feel they have a right to speak. Everybody feel that now is the time for them to advance their own opinions and their own beliefs. And that is quite unfortunate.
Well,
at this time, it would have been better if all of Tobago chose its support behind a process, because there was a process. It wasn't a case where somebody sat in a room and decided to go on the computer and type up a document based on their own bright ideas. It was a process. Well, we consulted, we talked to the people of Tobago, and we arrived at these bills.
Mr. Dennis, there's one question though I do want to get in before, because we're running out of time. One of the things with the status of Trinidad and Tobago, I feel part of it is just the perception or the labels. And I feel as though we inherited the fact that Tobago is a ward of Trinidad from when we were colonies and when that arrangement started then. And now I'm not too sure if that label means quite the same thing that it did. To some extent it does, to some extent it might not. And I do wonder if part of it is because with respect, sometimes literally if you call someone with a disrespectful name, they will feel disrespected in their personal life. Yep. Do you think that perhaps it's just one small token, it's not going to solve everything, but as an example, we do need to reconsider, defining Tobago, their relationship with the nation on a whole, to be not a ward, but something else?
The Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago defines our country, and people need to read that. Defines our country as the island of Trinidad and the island of Tobago.
Right.
And it speaks to the maritime waters of the country of a whole. And that is the definition of the country of Trinidad and Tobago. So we should not necessarily entertain these conversations about ward and ward when that is really a thing of the past, based on the constitutional definition of the country of Trinidad and Tobago. It doesn't say Trinidad and the ward, no. It says the island of Trinidad and the island of Tobago. So I think people need to familiarize themselves with that and understand how this country is defined.
Well, thank you for that. That's a good point, I think. And perhaps people do put too much stock in things that don't really matter that much. I mean, you want to define it as a borough, then that's not necessarily going to be that much better. But it also goes to show how complex this is, how complex this arrangement is. And we do need to kind of let cooler heads prevail and work at it for a better situation, but not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, trying to, do too much. Mr. Dennis, your final words?
Yeah, and my desire is that the leaders on the island of Tobago simply temper their intellectual egos. The Chief Secretary, Vanus James, the leader of the IDA, everybody, temper your intellectual egos. I know you may think that your idea and your proposal is the best, and maybe at some point in our history we will get to that. Maybe, we don't know, at some point in the history when I am 90 years old, or before, we don't know, we may be having a conversation about federalism or independence, because that is how it has been for all countries who have walked this journey. A gradual movement from one thing to the next, because you could never fully maximize your potential. There's always the need for improvement. But I wish that the leaders in Tobago at this time will temper their egos and try not to advance fresh ideas into the mix now, such as a proposal for the membership of the THE to be 55. All that does is that it adds mud to the water, right? It disrupts a process. And as I said before, the process is one that can be scrutinized anyway. It was very democratic. It was very all-inclusive. And we had wide consultations. I attended a meeting where one school auditorium was filled to capacity, right? Which perhaps meant beyond 1,000 persons. I have never seen any public forum to discuss any matter concerning governance with so many people in Tobago, right? So people need to temper their intellectual egos and get on board behind this process where we have 2 bills waiting in the Parliament for the attention of our 41 members of Parliament in the lower house and of course our senators in the upper house. Let they have their say, let them do their work, and let's get this bill passed.
Well, I hope that I hope this does not turn into a top spinning in one situation. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Dennis, for coming on and having the discussion. It's a very complex one that I think a lot of us take for granted and a lot of people in the country don't understand. But to some extent, it takes Parliament to sort this out. So it is, to some extent, a national issue that more people should be aware of. So thank you for being on AM Prime with me.
It was a pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. Folks, this is AM Prime on WSN. Time to close things off here. Of course, we will have Talking Point by 8 a.m., so you could tune in and watch me again on that. But you could stay tuned to WSN throughout the day for local Caribbean content. And of course, don't forget, this Friday, we'll have our 3rd episode of Carnival. We have a giveaway. Check our social media. I'll talk about it more on Talking Point. But we'll close AM Prime for now. We'll see you, AM Prime, tomorrow. But you could see me in half an hour on Talking Point. See you soon. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Yeah, this is Gladman Blackie. Carnival is really not your thing, so you're going away for the whole weekend. Move smart. Tell the police or tell a trusted neighbor so they can throw an eye on the property for you. Be smart to be safe for this carnival. When I see woman, I just feel like a glad man. Blackie says so. As I see girl, I want to fed. One look at what me wallet. Glad man.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We the police officers, we are professional and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, is for all of us in public.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokaram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
Well, on Wednesday night, the tractors moved a little bit closer to the police armored vehicles and vans that are blocking them from moving any further. It was just, they said, a playful attempt to put pressure a little bit on the government, but the ones that we've spoken to here are very much against any confrontation. They don't want to damage their tractors, which they need for work. The union delegation made a note, actually, of saying, look, here, on these road blockades, we're very much in the spirit of non-confrontation. In fact, on the contrary, a little earlier we saw farmers offering croissants to those police officers stationed just at the front of the convoy. And the atmosphere, it must be said, is still very much lively. There's a fire, barbecues, despite the rain and the cold weather.
Karis, thank you for that. Karis Garland, they're reporting from one of the many farmers' protests around France. Well, teachers have also gone on strike across France this Thursday. They say the mass movement is a warning to the government over their working conditions and low salaries. The strike movement was launched late last year, but the naming of the new education minister, who is also the sports minister, has left many teachers feeling that education is not being taken seriously in France. Teachers will be marching to show their anger today, starting at 2 p.m. from the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. Other rallies have been planned in cities across France, like Marseille, Rennes, and Nantes. In the U.S., there was a tense hearing over child safety between the heads of the biggest social media companies in the world and lawmakers Wednesday. Tech giants are confronting a torrent of political anger for not doing enough to stop online dangers for children, including from sexual predators and teen suicide. During one round of heated questioning, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg was made to stand up and apologize to the families of victims who had packed the committee room.
Before I wrap up, I want to recognize the families who are here today, who have lost a loved one or lived through some terrible things that no family should have to endure. These issues are important for every parent and every platform. I'm committed to continuing to work in these areas, and I hope we can make progress today.
Mark Zuckerberg there apologizing to parents, but time and time again, children's advocates and parents have stressed that none of the companies are doing enough. Here's more from one mother who lost her 15-year-old child to an online challenge.
Mason was a smart, kind, curly-haired, normal teen living a healthy lifestyle. These harms are happening overnight to our average kids. No other American industry goes unregulated, and the tech industry should not be an exception. They currently have no incentive to apply the safety features necessary to protect young lives. They are untouchable, and they know